After previously causing major trouble at his former school, Gray was eventually expelled, and the only school willing to accept him was Yunyang High School, a school filled with delinquent students who lacked basic manners. On his first day at school, Gray, the transfer student, immediately earned the respect of everyone at Yunyang High School. There was even a specific rule not to mess with him. Not without reason, word had already spread that Gray had once taken down a UFC athlete at his old school, earning him the nickname Psychopath. Switching to Eugene, a student who routinely handed out milk and snacks to other students. Despite his meek demeanor, he was often treated harshly by his peers, one of whom was a student named Colton. Colton beat up Eugene after he refused to steal Gray's phone. With no other choice, Eugene was eventually forced to take Gray's phone in secret. To ease his guilt, Eugene later approached Gray to apologize. He even offered extra money in case Gray wanted to buy a new phone. However, seeing the bruise on Eugene's lip, Gray already understood what had really happened. That night, Gray visited the hospital to see Steven, his best friend from his former school, who was still unconscious. This left Gray haunted by guilt, knowing he was the reason his only friend was in a coma. As he walked to class the next day, Gray saw Colton and his gang bullying Eugene. Although Gray considered stepping in to teach them a lesson, he chose to walk away to avoid making things worse. After briefly speaking with Gray, Eugene gathered the courage to approach him, and said that Gray was the only person at school who ever paid attention to him. After school, Gray happened to see some students from another school trying to recruit two Yunyang students into the gang alliance. During the meeting, Colton showed up to meet someone named Wolf. Colton promised to deliver 100 phones within a week, on the condition that Wolf take out the most feared student at Yunyang High School, Ben. It turned out Colton had been forcing Eugene to steal phones from other students to fulfill this deal with Wolf, the gang leader from another school. Trying to prove himself to Gray, Eugene found the courage to return the stolen phones to their rightful owners. This, of course, made Colton furious when he found out the phones were gone. He immediately confronted Eugene, and beat him up on the spot. But for the first time, Eugene dared to fight back, though he still ended up badly beaten. During this moment, Gray remembered the brutal beatings he and his friends once endured at their former school. He didn't want the same thing to happen again at his new school. Seeing Colton going too far, Gray stepped up to confront him. However, he didn't retaliate and simply stood there taking Colton's punches. In the middle of the fight, Alex from the basketball club intervened, warning Colton to stop unless he wanted to fight him one-on-one. After the incident, Gray and Eugene grew closer. Eugene brought Gray to a hidden room made by bullying victims to treat his wounds. Eugene explained that victims couldn't go to the school infirmary, because if they did, the teachers would call Colton, and the cycle of abuse would repeat. Meanwhile, rumors about Gray's violent past began to spread, stories of how he had hospitalized several students at his old school. On the other hand, Colton, still bitter about the recent events, started plotting revenge. But instead of acting directly, he tried to pit Gray and Alex against each other. After trashing the basketball club room, he sent a student to tell Alex that Gray had challenged him to a fight. Eventually, Alex confronted Gray. Though Eugene tried to explain the misunderstanding, Alex, already furious, refused to listen. At first, Gray didn't want to fight back, until Alex brought up Gray's past and insulted his friend who was now in the hospital. That made Gray snap, and the fight between them finally broke out. Neither of them realized they were being manipulated by Colton for his own gain. Once both of them were exhausted, Colton and his gang showed up and attacked them both. But then, Ben, Alex's teammate from the basketball club, arrived. Ben was the top dog at Yunyang High School, known for keeping peace and preventing fights between students. With just one leap, Ben took Colton down instantly. Even Colton's gang didn't dare to make a move and surrendered rather than face Ben. After Colton and his gang left, Ben and Alex apologized to Gray for the misunderstanding. But fed up with all the drama, Gray walked away, leaving him behind. To this day, Gray still blames himself for what happened to Steven. That's why he does his best to hold back and avoid getting into fights with anyone. As a peacekeeper, Ben, who had just returned after serving a suspension, is shown greeting his friends. But unlike Gray, Ben is academically behind. Because of the recent fight, they were called to the teacher's office and assigned to volunteer at a mall festival. Over time, the four of them began forming a bond of friendship. During this time, Eugene shared a well-known secret about several schools being part of a gangster alliance. This is where Ben's role as a peacekeeper becomes crucial. He protects students from being dragged into that group. According to rumors, several schools in the area had already joined the alliance, including Wolf's. Meanwhile, Donald is the gang leader overseeing all the schools under the alliance. Colton had been stealing phones from other students as a requirement to be accepted into the group. But because Ben refused to join, students from Yunyang High School became targets, getting bullied by members from the allied schools. This prompted Ben, the leader of Yunyang, to step in and teach them a lesson, even if it meant frequently getting suspended for fighting. Elsewhere, Colton is shown being beaten to a pulp for failing to deliver the phones, and for losing the ones he had collected. He was brought before Donald to take responsibility. Donald then contacted Wolf, instructing him to meet Ben again. But before meeting Ben, Wolf, while waiting in the bathroom, ran into Gray, and introduced himself with a few punches. However, after a few exchanges, Gray managed to read Wolf's moves and avoid his hits. When Wolf exited the bathroom and met Ben, he mentioned that he had just met the new kid and gave him a little welcome greeting, which briefly worried Ben. But after seeing that Gray was unharmed, Ben was relieved. On the other hand, Donald was not only the leader of the alliance but also incredibly smart. He even ranked first academically at his school. On top of that, his fighting skills were far above average. This was demonstrated during his fight against Colton, who had brought backup to take revenge. Despite being outnumbered, Donald effortlessly took down Colton and his men one by one, thanks to his sharp analysis skills, similar to Gray's. When Gray visited Stephen at the hospital, he encountered Wolf again, who brought him to the Alliance's bowling alley base because Donald wanted to meet him. But Gray didn't care about what was going on between Ben and Donald. What mattered to him was making it clear that if Donald ever sent people to the hospital where Stephen was being treated again, Gray wouldn't hesitate to take them all down. Meanwhile, Ben received a sudden call from a police officer informing him that his father was once again involved in trouble with local thugs at his food stall, something orchestrated by Donald, who had intentionally sent people to stir up chaos there. Later, Gray found Ben in the basketball room and told him he had met Donald the night before. Ben understood and promised to find a way to stop Donald's alliance from bothering their school any further. After school, Wolf ambushed Alex and Eugene on their way home. Alex was forced to hold back several of Wolf's men while telling Eugene to run. However, overwhelmed by numbers, Alex couldn't hold them all off, and Eugene had to run for his life, desperately trying to hide. In a moment of relative safety, Eugene called Gray to check on him. Even though Eugene didn't say he and Alex were in danger, Gray quickly realized something was wrong after hearing a scuffle over the phone when Eugene was caught by Wolf's men. Meanwhile, Ben arrived alone at the Alliance's headquarters to confront Donald without an ounce of fear. Standing before Donald, Ben even trashed his desk to show he wasn't afraid of either him or the Alliance. It turned out Donald wanted to recruit Ben into the Alliance, as Ben was the only one who had dared to refuse them. Unlike other schools that were forced to join the Alliance through violence, Donald attacked Ben psychologically by targeting people close to him. Once Ben realized something was off, he tried to leave, but it wasn't that simple, as several Alliance members were already waiting for him in the hallway. This is where Ben's true fighting skills were revealed, skills that made him feared by every student at Yunyang. He fought back without hesitation, despite being outnumbered. Just before Ben could completely overpower them, Donald stepped in and ordered the fight to stop, letting Ben walk away, even though Donald's men had been humiliated in their own territory. At the same time, Wolf was shown brutally beating up Alex and Eugene on the school rooftop, until Gray arrived. For the first time in a while, Gray broke his vow to avoid fighting and switched back into his brutal mode, immediately attacking Wolf with his pen. In street fights, there's no such thing as fairness. The winner isn't the one with better technique, but the one who takes down their opponent first. That's why Gray always fights using whatever's at hand. Even though he was outmatched in technique, he turned the tide by using a flower pot to distract Wolf. When Wolf's footing faltered, Gray snatched his glasses and kept targeting his legs, until both of them collapsed at the same time, just as Ben arrived at the rooftop. After the fight on the school rooftop, Gray has now regained consciousness. At that moment, Ben explained that they managed to escape, while Wolf was unlucky enough to get caught by the police. He also apologized and promised not to involve Gray in his problems anymore. However, upon hearing that, Gray denied it and said, in essence, that if they kept retaliating against each other, this would never end and someone would end up seriously hurt. After hearing those words, Ben contacted Donald and openly admitted defeat for the sake of everyone. Meanwhile, on the other side, Wolf was shown limping out of the police station, where Donald was already waiting for him to take him to a special place. Donald wanted to make sure their secret about the fake account wouldn't leak to the police. However, Donald's statement disappointed Wolf, as it seemed like Donald didn't care about his condition, nearly crippled after the fight with Gray, and only cared about his business. The next day, when Donald was on his way home from school, he was suddenly stopped by two men who told him to meet their boss, a gangster. At first, Donald politely said he would go meet the boss on his own. But when words weren't enough to make people understand, Donald had no choice but to show his firmness. When he arrived at the headquarters, Donald was already awaited by his boss, who had earlier received a call from the police about Wolf's involvement in trouble. Essentially, the boss advised him to be more careful and not act recklessly. After that, Donald sent his men to harass Ben's father, trying to pressure Ben into joining his alliance. Donald promised not to bother them again, as long as Ben agreed to join. Hearing that, Ben vented his frustration by beating up those who were bothering his father one by one, which led to him being suspended from school again. However, this made Ben's father angry, calling him a useless son. In this desperate situation, Ben eventually broke his own promise to never be part of the alliance. He finally joined them, thinking that it was the only way to earn money to help his father and protect his friends. Once officially part of Donald's group, Ben was immediately assigned to go to a cafe and deal with a student from another high school who had defied the alliance's orders. From then on, Ben began making a lot of money, which he used to support his father. Meanwhile, Gray, who now lives with his mother, got scolded harshly after she found out that he kept getting into trouble at school. She even threatened to transfer Gray to another school soon. Not long after, Eugene and Alex came to his house to ask him out to play basketball, as they had found out that Gray would soon be transferring schools. They wanted to spend time with him before that happened. But up until that moment, they had no idea that Ben had joined Donald's group. The next day, Gray was shown at the airport, ready to fly to another city. After receiving a call from his friends, Gray realized he shouldn't leave and decided to cancel his plan to transfer schools. After learning about Ben joining the alliance, they made it their mission to bring him back, as they all knew Ben did it out of guilt, thinking he had made things harder for his friends, something that wasn't true at all. So after school, Gray and the others went to Ben's house. Unfortunately, Ben wasn't home, and his father said he hadn't come back for several days. At that moment, Alex shared how Ben and Donald were actually childhood friends. Back then, Donald wasn't tough at all and couldn't fight. Because Ben couldn't stand seeing Donald getting bullied all the time, he taught him how to fight, and the two became close friends. Eventually, due to a difference in mindset, Donald, who was initially taught to be brave, ended up becoming a bully himself. From that moment on, Ben felt guilty and regretted his actions. After that, they went to meet Colton to gather information. Colton then explained the usual hangout spots of the alliance members and gave them details about the group. The first location is the bowling alley, where Donald is employed as a manager by his boss. This place is actually used as a front for money laundering in their illegal business. Then there's the motorcycle workshop, which is actually a storage for stolen goods that are later sold on the marketplace. Although Gray already knew where Ben might be, he still asked Alex not to take action yet, as their preparations were not yet complete. However, secretly, Gray went to the bowling alley alone to meet Donald, intending to provoke him. What Gray didn't realize was that Donald had already sent some members of the alliance to the motorcycle workshop after seeing that Eugene and Alex were searching the place, trying to find evidence of the crimes committed by Donald's alliance and report it to the police. Realizing this, Gray intended to follow them, but was blocked by Donald. Fortunately, at that moment, Ben appeared, angrily telling Gray to leave the place. Gray explained that Eugene and Alex were at the workshop and that the alliance members were heading there to capture them. Therefore, Gray asked Ben to come with him and help save them. Hearing Gray's words, Ben finally came to his senses and decided to return to his friends. However, before that, he still had to finish things with Donald. Meanwhile, at the workshop, Eugene and Alex had successfully found the ledger containing records of stolen motorcycles that had been embezzled by the alliance. Unfortunately, the alliance members arrived just as they were about to leave the workshop, forcing Alex to fight him off while protecting Eugene, who couldn't fight. Although Alex initially managed to knock down several people, he was eventually overpowered due to the sheer number of enemies. However, Eugene, who had never dared to fight before, suddenly found the courage to protect his friend, giving him a chance to escape. Meanwhile, Gray, who was trying to catch up with him, suddenly received a call from the hospital informing him that his friend Steven was in critical condition. This made Gray freeze, and he was hit by a car. Eugene and Alex, who were trying to escape, were caught and beaten by the Alliance members. They even managed to retrieve the stolen evidence from Eugene and Alex. But just then, Ben appeared to help his friends, taking down the Alliance members one by one. When Ben began to go into a rage and wanted to eliminate one of the members, his anger subsided when he heard the news from Eugene that Gray had been hit by a car and was now in the hospital. Seeing their friend lying in the hospital bed, Ben and the others obviously felt very guilty. Later that night, Gray's mother appeared to confirm that Gray's condition had improved. However, she also asked him to stay away from her son, warning that their friendship might bring something bad to Gray. When Ben returned home, he was greeted by his father, who said that a few days ago, Ben's friends had come to visit him, making Ben feel even more guilty for worrying his friends. Meanwhile, Donald was seen holding a meeting with his members for failing to capture Eugene and Alex. His anger grew when he learned that a page from his crime ledger had been torn out by Eugene. Fearing trouble with the police, Donald issued an order to capture Eugene that very day. The next morning, Eugene handed the evidence over to the police. However, the police rejected the report, saying that the torn page wasn't strong enough as evidence to warrant an investigation. As Eugene was leaving the police station, he was suddenly confronted by the Alliance members, who immediately took him to a certain location. But this time, Eugene had become a completely different person, daringly challenging Donald by saying he would erase the photo of the document, as long as Donald and his members stopped bothering his friends. Wolf suddenly appeared, and after seeing Eugene's courage and determination, Wolf started to respect him and began beating up the Alliance members, who were his own friends. After that, Ben arrived to save Eugene, thanking Wolf for his help. Switching to Donald, he was once again visited by the gang leader after Eugene's police report. His boss felt that lately, Donald had been failing in managing his subordinates. He warned that if something like this happened again, he wouldn't hesitate to take out Donald. The next day, Ben went to Donald's school alone, challenging the Alliance to prove who would come out victorious. If he won, Ben demanded that Donald's Alliance be disbanded, and if he lost, then Yunyang High School would remain under the Alliance's control forever. Alex also made an announcement at school, stating that Yunyang High School would fight against Donald's Alliance, and he encouraged all students to join them in the fight. This was the first time Ben led his friends to stand up against Donald's Alliance, which had been oppressing their school. Before starting their action, Ben took the time to visit Gray, who was still lying in the hospital. Not long after, Gray finally woke up, and the first thing he was concerned about was Steven's condition. After ensuring Gray had fully recovered, they gathered again to plan their strategy to fight against Donald's Alliance. Gray then suggested attacking Donald's Alliance from the inside with Wolf's help. Surprisingly, Wolf agreed to this, as the destruction of the Alliance would also benefit him. Wolf was the one who held the account for Donald's Alliance, used to store all the group's money. The main reason people joined the Alliance was because they were lured by the money. So when the members found out that the Alliance had lost its funds, they would naturally split apart. Then, the day they had been waiting for finally arrived. As Gray had planned, the Alliance members were divided, drastically reducing their numbers. Meanwhile, Yunyang High School was the opposite, as all the students united to fight against Donald's Alliance. At the same time, Gray received a message from Wolf, inviting him to retrieve the evidence of the crime from the bowling alley headquarters, since it was quiet at the time with the Alliance members gone with Donald. However, instead of handing over the evidence as promised, Wolf trapped Gray to detain him at the location. Eventually, Gray managed to defeat the enemy holding him captive, thanks to Eugene's help. Meanwhile, Ben and Donald, each with their own group of followers, finally faced off, leading to a big battle. Since the two groups had roughly equal numbers, the fight seemed evenly matched. Although Alex and some of his other teammates struggled to face Donald's men, Ben and Donald were seen easily taking down multiple people at once, ultimately facing each other. There was a difference in their fighting styles. Ben focused solely on attacking one spot repeatedly, targeting Donald's left arm, while Donald took every opportunity to land blows on Ben. As a result, Donald had the upper hand in terms of damage, eventually knocking Ben down. But just when it seemed like Donald had won, Gray appeared and continued the one-on-one duel with Donald. Although Donald could still stand, he could only use his right hand, as his left arm had been injured from Ben's attacks. Gray, using the same fighting trick as Ben, began targeting the same spot repeatedly, this time, Donald's left leg. Although Gray was eventually knocked down by Donald, the damage he caused made it difficult for Donald to move. At this point, Ben, who had regained enough strength, landed a decisive blow that Donald never saw coming, defeating the Alliance's boss. In short, things returned to normal. There was no more bullying or extortion after the Alliance was disbanded. Additionally, Stephen, Gray's good friend, finally regained consciousness after being in a coma for a long time. On the other side, Wolf returned to the Alliance's headquarters. Wolf met with the gang boss, who asked him to continue as the leader of the Alliance after Donald's sudden disappearance. Meanwhile, Donald, who was reported missing after the fall of his alliance, was eventually found dead, with no one knowing the cause of his death. Despite the past conflicts, Ben and his friends still came to pay their last respects.